Alright, so we're back once again. This time I want to actually do something a little bit different. Obviously my last few videos have been on the Puerto Rico disaster, and it kind of got me thinking about grindy ships and, how grindy this game is overall. And with that, I actually did a little bit of investigative work and wanted to come up with, what is the most grindiest ship in the entire game. So I did a little bit of math, I assumed some things, and I'm going to show you the results right now. So I went through it country by country, and when I did each country, I obviously did destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, and carriers too all. So what I did was I summed the entire XP required to get from tier 1 to tier 10. I didn't include tier 1 because it's a free ship anyways, for every country and every nation. I summed the XP, I assumed an average XP value, which I would say I think to balance it out between Unicum and new players, I put the XP average at around 1500. Now some may say that's too high, some may say it's too low, but I think that's a healthy balance between really good players and really below average players. That being said, I also did the silver because oftentimes the limiting factor isn't the XP, it's the actual silver required to get each ship progressively. Now, take this with a grain of salt. This doesn't actually include modules. It doesn't include upgrading hulls and stuff, and armaments and stuff like that. I just wanted to see, can I get a general feeling of how actual grindy each line is. So with that, I want to bring up the first country, which is the USA. And for the USA, you'll see that the highest amount of XP required was the BB, the tier 10 Montana. It required 679,500 XP. Now, if you take into consideration the average XP rate, that leaves you with 453 games required to get the amount of XP you need to get from tier 2 to tier 10. Now, if we're talking silver for the USA line, that's 58,144,000 silver. And I failed to say this earlier, but I assumed an average silver rate of about 100,000 silver per game. I know for lower tiers that probably doesn't actually fit, but higher tiers, you could probably get that. I mean, around tier 6, tier 7, you're probably making more than 100k, so I'd say it kind of averages out overall. So with that, with the 58,144,000, if you divide that by 100,000, you're going to get 581 games required to complete the Montana. Moving on. Now, I want to preface this with a little bit. Obviously, I included Pan-Asian DDs and the Italian cruiser line. Even though they don't have BBs or DD, or the Italian line doesn't have BBs or DDs, and the Pan-Asian line doesn't have cruisers or BBs, I thought it was important to include them anyways, just to get an idea of, the overall required amount of grind for each nation. So with that, I'm going to bring up the Italian figures right here. Italy, the required amount of XP was 621,050. Now if we assume the average rate of 1500, that gives us 414 games required to grind the entire Italian cruiser line. That being said, the silver amount is significantly higher, with 52,205,000 silver required to grind from tier 2 to tier 10. That results in the amount of games being 522, which is quite significant. Not all that far off the US BBs. Right, moving on to Pan-Asian DDs. The amount of XP required for Pan-Asian DDs was 627,650. Now, when you translate that into games, it's 418 games required. So slightly more than the Italians, but again, you can see the kind of consistencies between the the XP required to get cruisers and DDs. It's very similar. It's when you switch to BBs where it actually starts really increasing. which is kind of be expected because they are the really big hard hitters of the game. You can't really have warships without battleships. That being said, the Pan-Asian silver is 51,728,000, which obviously translates to a number of games of 517. Again, slightly less, surprisingly enough, than the Italian cruiser line. Next up is the IGN line. Now, there's a lot of lines in this nation's arsenal. So I went through all of them. They have carriers. They have 2 DD lines actually. You have the Shima and the Harugumo. Now, what I did for that is I created 2 lines out of that kind of 1.5 line for the 2 DDs. So I think it's 1 to 4, 1 to 5 is the same for both lines. So what I did was just create 2 versions of that and then sum them all the same way. That being said, the highest XP required is obviously the Yamato, the tier 10 IGN-BB, with 704,300 XP required to complete this ship from tier 2 to tier 10. What that translates into 469 games, 0.55. So you could round it to about 470 games. Now, if we're talking silver, again, it's the Yamato. And the silver required is 59,753,000. And that translates into 597 games on the Yamato. I think you're starting to get the picture of just how grindy this game is and how difficult it is actually to get tier 10s. Because the most of this actual required grinding comes from like tier 7 or tier 6 to tier 10. Yeah, probably tier 7 to tier 10 probably. Or even tier 8 to tier 10. Next up is the USSR, the Russian bias. Let's see if it actually plays out. Again, I compared all the lines, and what came out on top was the Russian BB line, as expected, with 704,300 XP, the exact same as the IGN line, which again leaves us to a number of games acquired as 470. And strangely enough, the amount of silver acquired for the Kremlin is exactly the same as the Yamato. 59,753,000 silver acquired, which again translates into 597 games. Now you may be thinking, oh, hang on, that's probably the Kremlin, the Yamato, they're probably the most grindiest ships in the game. But you would be wrong. You'd be dead wrong. Alright, so we move on to the UK line right now. So again, following the trend of this video, the most expensive ship for the UK line is the Conquer, the tier 10 BB. It costs 717,900 XP. And what that translates into is 479 games. So it's probably actually so far it is the most expensive BB in terms of XP. Now we get to silver. The silver cost of this ship is 60,539,000, which is the highest so far of any nation. That translates into 605 games, which is a humongous amount of games. The one thing I like to point out actually about all these lines is that the XP will not be the difficult part. The difficult part will get in the credits. And this is true for every single line. That being said, we move on to the last nation. It's the one, it's the only, it's the French line. And I saved the best for last. We compared the French lines, the highest obviously being the BB, the Republique. And what I found was that the XP required for the Republique is 722,950. And if we do the calculations right, it ends up being 491 games, the most grindiest ship in the entire game. That's free to play. Okay, so when we talk about silver for the Republic, it ends up being 60,638,000 silver credits. And that translates into 606 games on French BBs to finally get that republic. So that's pretty much it. And it actually kind of surprised me a little bit. I always thought maybe the Yamato or maybe the Kremlin would actually be the most expensive. But it turns out the French are stealing all our money regardless. It was actually really interesting. I kind of had the feeling that BBs would be the most expensive. It was confirmed. But yeah, I'm really surprised by that French result, and even the British result too. Two nations that don't actually get mentioned all that much when it comes to battleships. Because people generally tend to be a lot focused on like the gunpowder of the Yamato, the tankiness of the Kremlin, stuff like that. So that was actually really surprising. So that just about wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of a informative video, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.